Good morning, Metalheads Internet. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and it's time for yet another Albums I Missed video. June's been a very interesting month, to say the least. A lot of the records that have been sent my way have been a lot more progressive and experimental than what I've been doing recently. The recent Panzerfaust record, for instance, was the first entry in a 4-part series, and I thought it was very different for them and very ambitious for them, and I even think it's probably the best album they've done yet. If the rest of the series is anything like it, I'm sure it'll be fucking fantastic. Not to mention the wild new record from Baroness, which saw them at their most emotional, their most delicate, their most open-minded, their most versatile and fiery. Bokassa played around with a very interesting fusion of stoner rock, punk rock, and hard rock. He is Legend took a similar template and expanded on it, went to the next logical extreme level, playing around with sludge metal, playing around with metalcore, playing around with modern contemporary heavy metal from bands like Avenged Sevenfold. Incredibly cathartic and emotional records as well from Pelican and Cave In, two bands that came out of tragedy with some of their strongest work in a while. All in all, an incredibly solid month, but as usual, there is plenty of stuff we missed, particularly from the world of death metal this month. I didn't review a lot of death metal at all, but there was tons of it this fucking month. 20 Buck Spin in particular has been cranking out so many great underground death metal records that I could probably switch this entire channel to focus only on releases from that label, and I'd still have 2 or 3 videos pretty much every week. So with that in mind, let's get right into it. Let's look at some of the albums that I feel that I missed in June for 2019. Obviously, as always, if there is something that you still think that I missed, you still want me to check out, let me know. Probably won't cover it in a future video, but maybe I'll just listen to it for shits and giggles. So let's not waste any more time. Let's jump right into it, specifically starting with a new EP from Soilwork entitled Underworld, released June 14th via Nuclear Blast Records. Soilwork coming in with this EP hot off the heels of their January release Verkleiten, which a lot of people have been really enjoying. I reviewed it here on the Metal Meltdown. I thought it was okay. I've never admittedly been a huge fan of Soilwork, but I got some enjoyment out of it. I had some fun with some of the songs. And good news, if you like that album, you're gonna like Underworld as well. All the tracks on this EP are very much in line with what we heard on Verkleiten. You know, it's a lot of the same ideas, same concepts, same basic template, just a continuation of it. Some cool tunes on here, but I wouldn't say that this is a necessary purchase unless you are a serious Soilwork collector. And I say that because all the songs on here have actually been previously available on the physical special edition of Verkleiten. Which means if you were enough of a fan to buy the Soilwork album in the first place, there's a good chance you have heard these songs. So, again, unless you're a collector, there's not really much of a need to go out and seek this out. But for new fans, I think this is pretty cool. I think it gives you a taste of Soilwork without having to sink your teeth into an entire album. I think I actually prefer Soilwork in an EP format. I think it makes some of their stuff a little easier to swallow, so I think sometimes Soilwork gets a little lost within their own ambitions, particularly on Verkleiten. I think I gave Verkleiten a free, and that's probably what I would have given Underworld had I reviewed it, so there you have it. Next up, a massive compilation from Deathcore Titans Suicide Silence entitled Rare Ass Shit, released on June 6th. For those of you still bitching and moaning about the new metal flavors of the band's self-titled record, this is for you. Suicide Silence has gathered long-lost songs from old EPs and demos and B-sides and compiled them onto this compilation with the original mixes intact, original vocals from Mitch Looker intact. I actually hadn't really heard a lot of these songs, and the ones I had heard, I hadn't heard in a very long time, so it was actually pretty exciting to dig back into these songs and really hear where Suicide Silence came from and even hear them evolve throughout the course of the compilation record. Some of these songs are so old that they even feature a gentleman by the name of Tanner Womack on vocals, who, as far as I can tell, hasn't performed with the band officially since 2002. That's 5 years before the band's official debut album. I think it's a pretty solid release. Admittedly, I'm a bigger fan of more modern Suicide Silence. I'm actually one of the few people that actually really enjoyed their self-titled record, so therefore some of the more juvenile, deathcore-oriented stuff on here doesn't quite sit with me personally, but it was still interesting, you know? This album is a kind of a interesting time capsule of the deathcore genre itself. The only thing that kind of bugs me about this album is that it's very clearly part of an attempt for Suicide Silence to clean up their discography a little bit. They want people to kind of forget about the self-titled record and start looking at the older tracks. They want to clean up shop a little bit. And before you say anything, I really don't think I'm looking too far into this, because Suicide Silence is also releasing a live album later this month, which only features material from before the self-titled record. So clearly these guys are all about trying to prove that they're still a deathcore band at the moment while they prepare for the next studio album. It's arguably pandering with that in mind, but like I said, I really don't think anyone's going to be complaining about it. Next up, Southern Hostility from Upon a Burning Body, released June 7th via Seek and Strike Records. The band is fully embracing their groove metal aesthetic on this album. They've completely abandoned the Latin flavors that were so colorfully on display in some of their other works, and they've even toned down a lot on the deathcore. And what's left here is like the most diet, washed out version of Pantera that a human being could possibly create. It's a big dose of southern attitude and chunky riffs and in-your-face piss and vinegar vocals with no heart, no originality, nothing to say, nothing new to offer. Like, honestly, this just sounds like a bunch of rednecks jamming in someone's garage after listening to a shit ton of Pantera. I don't get anything out of this other than an attitude, other than this whole edgy southern vibe. I'm not really sure if fans of Upon a Burning Body will care for this, seeing as how much of their sound that they've ditched. But that being said, the band is still out there, so clearly there must be some fan base that they are catering to that is eating this up. So good on you, I guess. This album certainly ain't for me. This is an album that I almost did review, and I'm frankly pretty happy that I didn't. If I had, I might have given it a 2. Yeah, let's go with that. Next up, Auric Gates of Veles from Hate, released June 14th via Metal Blade Records. This is the album I probably should have reviewed instead of that Firespawn record, because this album gave me the dose of death metal that I was looking for at that time, and this is also a lot more interesting and engaging. Still not the most original pile of death metal out there, but all things considered, it's definitely still a stronger record. There's a lot of hellish energy to this. It's very intense, with guitar solos and blast beats all over the place, filthy, disgusting, almost blackened vocals. The band works with a lot of familiar ideas, but uses them in entertaining and exciting ways. Again, it's not going to win awards for originality, but I don't really think it's actively trying to either. I think it's just trying to be a really fun, intense, extreme metal record, and that's what Hate have accomplished here. I guess with that said, if you haven't enjoyed other records from the band, this wouldn't quite do it for you either, but Hate isn't exactly the most well-known band in the world anyway, so there's a good chance that if you know them, you already know about them, and therefore you already know what you're getting into, so it's on you, honestly, if you go into this and don't like it. Honestly. Next up, Bury the Pain from Xentrix, released June 7th via Listenable Records. You know, you got like waves and tiers of thrash metal. You got like top tier, which is where you get like the Big Four and Testament and that kind of shit. And then you get the lower tiers where you got Exodus and Overkill and Metal Church and some other stuff. And then you got like the C tier where you got like Xentrix. And Xentrix have never done anything to try and elevate into those other tiers, in my opinion. And Bury the Pain is no different. It is totally competent, but ultimately generic, inessential thrash metal. It's just a whole lot of nothing. There are younger bands playing this style of music, playing it with more originality, more intensity, more confidence. Which isn't to say the band does a bad job. If you're just looking for a dumb, simple blast of old school thrash metal, this will certainly satisfy. But I'm just not even sure why Xentrix even exists in 2019. They weren't even really that popular within the glory days of thrash metal, and they haven't done anything in 23 years. Like, I don't get why these guys are even still around. I don't know. I'm hoping I'm in the minority on this, because they seem like a cool group of dudes. They seem like they really still love playing thrash metal. I just wish that they loved originality just as much. Next up, the debut self-titled album from Flub, released June 7th via The Artisan Era. Flub is interesting. They are a kind of a supergroup featuring current and former members of Rivers of Nile, Alter Beast, Veil of Nath. They play tech death, duh, considering the bands I just mentioned, but their brand of tech death is a little bit more colorful and, dare I say, even uplifting at times. There's influence from the world of fantasy literature and world music and all these neoclassical flares throughout the record, and while it's definitely still tech deaf, it's not quite as punishing as any of the records that I think we would associate with all the bands in most tech deaf. They frequently even draw influence from a style of Central and South American dance music called cumbia, which shows up in the rhythm sections, it shows up in some of the patterns and time signatures. It sounds subtle, but it's just enough to give all these compositions a really interesting flair and dynamic that other tech deaf bands don't really have. There's an open-mindedness to Flub that I don't really see from the tech deaf genre as a whole, without having to stray into alien territory. And most importantly, the songs are really engaging and really good, and the album is mixed really well. I would probably even say that this is one of my favorite tech deaf albums released so far this year. I would have reviewed it had I had the time, but unfortunately I did not. The first 2 weeks of June were very heavy with new releases, but I am happy I got to talk about it at least here. I think if I had given this review, I probably would have given it a 3.5 out of 5. Next up, Concept Unification from Pinkish Black, released June 14th via Relapse Records. There's a lot I like about this record. I like the sound, I like the aesthetic, I like the atmosphere of the record. It feels very cinematic and gigantic and even epic at times, but still down to earth. Pinkish Black dealing with a lot of human emotions. I think within its best moments, Concept Unification is an incredibly engrossing psychedelic experience, but unfortunately its worst moments really bring the album down. It's bloated, the pace is really slow, monotonous at times. It kind of drags on and on and on, and while there's a lot to love about the concept and the aesthetic, sometimes musically Pinkish Black is really lacking and don't really have a lot to offer outside of all of these weird, massive soundscapes. I don't know enough about the band's other works to comment where this fits in the band's discography, but I have heard comments from people, notably a review from the Angry Metal Guy saying that other records are significantly better written and executed, and that all things considered, this is probably their weakest record. Again, I don't know enough to comment, but just based on what I've heard here, I didn't really get a lot out of it. I don't really see much of a reason to come back. There's definitely a lot of good stuff in here, but you really need to be patient and understanding to stick with it. Next up, Stampede by Hed PE, released June 21st via Pavement Music. Jesus Christ, where do I fucking begin with this? It's bad, for one. Duh. This is like some serious Kid Rock, Limp Bizkit level rap metal bullshit that got brought into 2019 and drags along a new hip-hop influence with it and contemporary radio rock influence with it. And it's just such a cluttered fucking mess. I mean, holy shit, rap metal is not known for being the most eloquent genre in the world, but it has much stronger moments than what I'm hearing on this fucking record. This is a horribly put together record. The jarring contrast between the styles, it's just too fucking much. And I don't think that Hed PE is actively not trying. I think they really are trying. It's just they're trying in the wrong ways. And you could argue that there's not much the band could do because rap metal is so inherently dated, and to some extent you are right, but to another extent I have to argue, okay, then how are bands like Ghostmane and the Fever 333 doing so well, or Horror for that matter, or all these new trap hip-hop artists that are taking influence from heavy metal imagery and aesthetic and embedding within their music? Why are they so successful, whereas Hed PE is falling flat on their ass? The simplest answer I can give there is probably just youth. They have the benefit of being younger, being smarter, understanding where the genre went wrong, understanding where they can take the genre with new ideas from metal and hip-hop, whereas Hed PE is clearly stuck in the past and just plain clueless as to what the future of hip-hop and heavy metal is gearing towards. Just listen to this and you'll understand what I'm talking about. I don't normally do this, but I really think it's necessary for this. Just listen. Okay. That sums everything up right there. Fuck this album. Next up, an EP from Ingested entitled Call of the Void, released June 14th via Unique Leader Records. Call of the Void is a 17-minute platter of death metal with nasty riffs and breakdowns and in-your-face vocals, and that's all I got. Probably why I didn't review this record. There's just not a lot to talk about. I had fun with this EP. It's a good slice of extreme metal nonsense, but there's not really a lot to talk about as far as the band's sound and formation, and there's not really a whole lot to come back to once you've even finished with it. I think something like Serpents of Gnosis is stronger because it's got more outside influences, it's more technical, it's more punishing, whereas this is exactly as I described it and nothing else. Still, though, I really don't see any reason why fans of brutal and extreme music would not care for this EP. It certainly got everything you're looking for, and even if you hate it, well, fuck it, it's over in 17 minutes anyway. Like, it's not like you're really wasting a lot of time with this thing, you know? Next up, Steeping Corporeal Masses from Fetid, released June 7th via $20 Spin. Now we're getting into the $20 Spin stuff. Like I said, $20 Spin has been on a trend recently, releasing some of the best music in underground metal, and this is no different. This is a seriously gross, vile, nasty little slice of death metal. Super morbid and in your face. It lacks even the most basic death metal polish in its rawest and most powerful moments. It even reminds me of some very early Florida death metal. We're still not dealing with anything really all that experimental or different within the realms of death metal, so if nothing I've said sounds particularly satisfying to you, I would steer clear of this record. But if you're a big fan of underground death metal, particularly the stuff that's been coming out of $20 Spin as of late, then this might just be a must-have record for you. Next up, another release from $20 Spin, the debut album from Superstition entitled The Anatomy of Unholy Transformation, released June 21st. Yeah, you can take a lot of what I said about Fetid and actually apply it to this record, which isn't to say that Superstition don't have their own things going on. I think that they're probably a lot more menacing. I think they have more of a almost blackened, hellish energy to them. But the general output, the general execution, the aesthetic, it's more or less the same, at the very least strikingly similar. Like, I really don't picture any death metal fan that really enjoyed Fetus not also really enjoying Superstition. Of the two, I would say that I prefer this one. I do think it's a little bit more inventive and striking and engaging than Fetid. But like I said, still within the same general wheelhouse. If you're looking for another slab of $20 Spin death metal, can't really go wrong with this release. Next up, I think? I don't know. It's a new album by a band called Pound, and it was released right at the beginning of June via Silent Pendulum Records. This is a very challenging record, to say the least. It is an entirely instrumental affair that draws heavy influence from grindcore, mathcore, noise rock, and avant-garde metal. In its weirdest moments, it feels like a spastic combination of Duran Gray and the Dillinger Escape Plan. There are nuggets of other styles found throughout the album, but that's the general template that you're dealing with throughout the entire record, and it's a tough one, I'm not gonna lie. There's definitely a lot to admire about the structure and execution of this record. There's a lot to admire about the uncompromising flow, the incredible musicianship, the originality, and adventurous songwriting that Pound very clearly displays. But I kind of feel like they're going too weird. I kind of feel like at times they're maybe even being weird for the sake of doing so, for the sake of being shocking and provocative and jarring, rather than for the sake of creating really interesting music. It's an impossible record to listen to on a casual level, but even sit down trying to really analyze it is frankly very tough because there's all these moving pieces and the record never swells, it never silences, it never takes a break. It just keeps fucking going. This is an album meant strictly for people who love experimental rock and heavy metal. If you don't, if you're not even interested, stay the ever-loving fuck away, because I honestly think it's just going to annoy and irritate you. I think it's fair to say that Pound have created one of the most unique albums of 2019, but that uniqueness, that originality, definitely comes with a price. Next up, Cyber Metal from Skeletor, released June 21st via Gates of Hell Records. This is it's a pretty dumb album, to say the least. I mean, just look at that album cover. It's not exactly high art. Okay? Like, let's be real here. But when it comes to this specific brand of old school heavy metal, you know, these bands that combine speed metal, power metal, and thrash into a 80s loving package, I'm not exactly looking for intelligence. I'm just looking for cool riffs and cool hooks, and Skeletor has plenty of both. It's simple, it's engaging, it doesn't waste your time, it has all the best bits and pieces of classic heavy metal taken from Iced Earth, Man of War, Judas Priest, little dash of Iron Maiden thrown into the blender as well. If we're just talking about guitar work, this album is like straight up 5 out of 5. There are some molten hot riffs and solos found across the entire record here. And all the songs are really fucking solid. There's not a dull track, not a dull moment in any one track. It's just a really good collection of fucking classic fiery heavy metal. It may lack the unique edge that bands are starting to bring to the world of old school heavy metal, take for instance Bewitcher and Idle Hands. However, it makes up for it for being insanely well written, insanely well performed, and just being insanely fun. And that brings us to our final album, which is probably one of the oddest records I've reviewed on the Metal Meltdown, period. It is called Giant Green Destruction by a band called the Ogre Packet Slammers. It's brutal death metal. You know, it's pretty standard brutal death metal, too, from a strictly musical standpoint. But the concept, the aesthetic of this band is... How do I put this? It's Shrek. That's right, the Ogre Packet Slammers are obsessed with Shrek. They are obsessed with the Shrek movies, the Shrek memes. They put Shrek on the fucking album cover, too. The songs are about Shrek, you know? You got songs like Stay Out of My Swamp, the title track Giant Green Destruction. They even include a cover of the infamous Smash Mouth hit All-Star, which is undeniably the highlight of this whole fucking record. I was bursting with laughter the first time I heard this, and the second time I was legitimately headbanging to this motherfucker. And this song also achieves something pretty amazing for brutal death metal. It actually is a genuinely catchy song. Now, granted, that has a lot to do with the fact that most of us know this original song by heart. I mean, it's a hit. You take Shrek out of the equation, and it's a hit. This was on the radio for fucking years. This song itself is a meme all by itself. But it is something to note nonetheless. Congratulations, Ogre Packet Slammers. You somehow made a sing-along brutal death metal song. This album would by no means change your mind on brutal death metal, whether you like it or dislike it, but it is an incredibly fun and incredibly silly little record that at the very least you can get a couple laughs out of. I know I certainly did. At the very least, listen to that cover of All-Star, because it is one of the best things you'll probably fucking hear today. Guaranteed. And I guess that's it. Those are all the albums I wanted to talk about within the month of June. Obviously, there's still stuff I probably missed because June was such a cram-packed month. So with that in mind, if there's anything you feel that I missed, leave it in the comments. Let me know. Like I said at the very beginning, I probably won't review it, but I probably will at the very least listen to it and let you know what I think. As always, make sure you press that subscribe button so you get updates on Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.